There are growing signs that Israel could be on the brink of launching a full-scale ground invasion of Gaza. Overnight, Israel carried out its biggest airstrikes to date in its war against Hamas terrorists, and troops also conducted more ground raids. The army says its troops are still in the field. Communications in Gaza have been knocked out entirely.
Israel's military says this footage shows overnight operations in the Gaza Strip. They claim their fighter jets hit 150 tunnels and other underground infrastructure used by Hamas, killing several of the terror organization's commanders, some of whom they call key operatives in the October 7 massacre. Meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces have been massing tanks, infantry, and artillery outside the Gaza Strip. After several brief missions into the territory, the IDF says it's expanding ground operations. In Gaza, we are advancing in the stages of the war. Last night, IDF forces entered the area of the northern Gaza Strip and widened activity on the ground. Infantry, engineering, and artillery units are taking part in this stage, accompanied by massive fire. Expanding the operation serves all the war's aims. Almost half of Israelis polled by the newspaper Ma'ariv would rather delay the ground offensive. Many worry that sending in troops could endanger the more than 200 hostages still believed to be held by Hamas. But some supporters of the offensive say they feel Israel has no other choice.
Reading about the operations somehow offers a bit of support and strength. I truly believe, though, that we all continue to live in profound fear in the face of the murderers. There's no sense of security because we've been deeply wounded.
This is a war for the free world, a war for liberal values, for our home, for our children, our babies, our women, and our grandparents. It's not an easy war. We understand the pain on both sides, but we won't give up. We will stay here despite everything. The pain on both sides is sure to keep increasing as long as the fight drags on, and there are no indications of it ending soon.
Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters is in Sderot in southern Israel, close to the border with Gaza. Rebecca, it appears some Israeli ground forces are still inside Gaza today. What are officials telling you?
Well, that's what we're hearing from officials too, Michael, that the ground offensive or the targeted raids, as they're being called by the Israeli military, are still ongoing. The one that the troops that went in last night are still inside the Gaza Strip, as far as we're aware, according to the latest updates that we have. Now, I also have been hearing that they're trying to work out now. They're still trying to make a decision about whether or not they're going to continue forward and try and make this a larger ground invasion, as we've all sort of been expecting for the last few weeks, or whether they're going to pull out and keep doing these smaller raids sort of on the periphery or just inside the periphery line, I should say. Now, just over my shoulder, you can see Gaza, you can see the plumes of smoke. That's the Beit Hanun neighbourhood in the northeastern part of Gaza. And we've been seeing and hearing the missiles and the artillery fire pounding that city. We can see the plumes of smoke over rising above the skyline. It's not a very clear picture at the moment because of all the dust that is kicked up by those missiles and the dust that comes from the buildings that are destroyed. But you can get a bit of an image there of what's been happening all throughout the day. We know that yesterday and last night in particular was the heaviest bombardment since since the war began 3 weeks ago.
Rebecca, as you mentioned, that ground offensive appears to be slowly gathering pace. Mass mobilization of troops into Gaza hasn't happened yet, as you say, but raids are. How much support is there among Israelis for an escalation?
Well, you heard a little bit in that report there that perhaps support for a full ground invasion is losing, or the full ground invasion is actually losing support among Israelis. I think most Israelis that you speak to are fairly united. It doesn't really matter where they stand on the political spectrum, but they're pretty united in the goals that the Israeli military and the government have set, which is to try and eradicate or completely eliminate Hamas's military capabilities. And there seems to be a consensus behind that. But how the next steps and how that's, to be brought to fruition is now, I think, among the community, among the Israelis, I should say, knowing that there's those 200 plus hostages on the ground. We know that the hostage families in particular have been, making some noise. They sent a letter to the government expressing their concerns, their fear, the fact that they haven't been consulted and that they know that their loved ones are there and that their loved ones are going to be incredibly impacted also, as well as, of course, the more than 2 million Gazans still in the Strip. But these families saying that they are lobbying the government to try to prevent a full-scale ground invasion because they're worried of what that will mean for their loved ones. We know that the Defence Minister has now agreed to meet with the families, I believe, later today, and there may be some discussion there about trying to assuage their fears. But I think full support for a complete ground invasion is perhaps starting to wane slightly.
That is Rebecca Ritters from Sderot in southern Israel. Many thanks. Aid organizations say the communications blackout since Friday is complicating their relief efforts. The World Health Organization says it's impossible for ambulances to evacuate the injured.
As war rages in Gaza, paramedics are facing enormous challenges. Dozens of ambulances have been damaged in the Gaza Strip. Many are out of service. There is an acute need for more medical supplies and surgical equipment.
We no longer have any body bags in the ambulances, and we're facing difficulties in transporting decomposing bodies. There are tens, maybe hundreds of them in the houses that have been targeted.
According to rescue services, hundreds of buildings have been completely destroyed due to intense bombardment. Rescuers are sometimes hampered in their efforts to find trapped victims.
We lack heavy machinery and rely on private companies, but even their equipment, despite daily maintenance, is affected. These frequent breakdowns hinder our work.
The humanitarian situation for more than 2 million people is already dire. Since Friday evening, phone and internet services have been cut off, leaving people even more disconnected from the outside world.
We should mention we currently cannot contact our sources in Gaza anymore, but we got an update from the BBC's correspondent in Gaza, Rushdie Abu Alouf, reporting from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza.
Very chaotic scenes in the street. I have been driving through the city of Khan Yunis this morning. Less people, but more panic, and people, they don't know what to do in these circumstances. They can't establish communication with their friends, with their families. Even here in Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, the ambulance services are facing a very difficult situation dealing with the continuous Israeli airstrikes around Khan Yunis here.
I'd like to welcome Hadil Kazaz. She's the regional gender coordinator for Oxfam International, based in Ramallah in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Halil, we understand communications are down in Gaza. We also understand you may have family members there. When did you last speak to your colleagues and your family in Gaza?
We lost all connections with Gaza yesterday at 6 p.m. Yes, I have all my family, everyone I have in the world lives in the Gaza Strip, plus 33 staff of Oxfam International and many partners, long-term partners who we work with for a long time. We lost contact with all of them. We cannot reach anyone.
I realize to some extent I'm stating the obvious here, but with increased Israeli airstrikes and a communications blackout, it must be utter chaos. For example, when it comes to trying to get emergency care, is there any information at all trickling out?
Nothing. Since last night, we have zero information. We don't know what happened during the night. We don't know the needs, the emergent needs. Even before that, we had very little information, but very serious information about the catastrophic situation in the Gaza Strip. We in Oxfam warned from starvation being used as a weapon of war. Because only 2% of the Gazans' needs for food entered Gaza. People ran out of electricity, fuel, water, medication, anything, even before what happened last night, which we still don't know what happened last night. The total blackout also is very worrying, because for us it means that anything can happen in impunity. And basically because it's like we feel that we are back to the dark ages, really.
Well, to that point, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but you're making really interesting points there, including the fact that people cannot get the products that they need. Your organization, Oxfam, is among many international organizations calling for a ceasefire. What exactly is your demand?
Immediate ceasefire is very, very important for any humanitarian actors. And since we need since we see the huge need, we also see what's happening in terms of civilians who are being subjected to a very, very difficult situations and circumstances where they cannot fulfill their basic needs. There is a fear of dying, not only from bombing and shelling, but also from starvation and thirst. Then ceasefire is just a precondition for any humanitarian actor. We haven't seen this in all the history of Oxfam interventions around the world, and we have been in many humanitarian situations. We didn't see a place where for 3 weeks we couldn't have access. No one could secure access, even to assess the needs, even to support people with the basic life-saving medications, not only for injured and for people who are in critical conditions, but also for long-term patients, for diabetic people, for cancer patients, for anyone who would need premature babies, for the 5,500 women who are going to give birth this month alone. So we are really very, very worried about what's happening, and more worried now because of the blackout.
Hadil, I hate cutting you off when you're talking about something that's so emotional, but we're literally out of time. I do want to ask you very shortly, the UN has alerted Gaza is on the brink of a massive health hazard. Are we already in the worst case scenario, or things could get even worse at this point?
With the blackout, things can get much worse, in fact. And that's why we also demand for a return of the connections, not only the internet, but mobile and landline connections, so we can also know what's happening there. Yes, things unfortunately can get worse, unfortunately.
We're going to have to end it there. That is Hadil Kazaz from Oxfam International. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Protests have erupted worldwide in support of Palestinians, with demonstrations taking place in several countries. Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters marched to the heavily guarded U.S. Embassy in Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, to demand an end to the fighting. In the Pakistani city of Karachi, hundreds of protesters also rallied to condemn Israel's attacks on Gaza. Protesters carried banners and signs with pro-Palestinian slogans. In New Zealand's capital, Wellington, thousands marched to Parliament House to oppose the ongoing war and demanded a ceasefire for humanitarian aid.